Alright, I'm Joseph Summa, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit about my new game, lexi-code. This is a game designed for players who like words, players who like logical deduction and reasoning, and ultimately to be able to bring players who have different strengths in these two competing areas to the same table on near equal footing. In lexi-code, you're going to be dueling to deduce your opponent's lexi-code, which is a 5x5 grid with 7 letters distributed within it. Each row and column will have at least 1 letter in it, at maximum 2. Since there will be 7 letters in a 5x5 grid, there will be 2 rows and 2 columns that have a duplicate. I have put on the front of my description here a puzzle for players to try to solve. You can find that in the rulebook and review it. It's quite an interesting puzzle to be able to have, oh, I need a K here, I really should have an F here strategically, and I need an E or a T in my word. I need an E and a T in my word somewhere in order to be able to find the most information about my opponent's grid. You'll find out as we go through this how that situation could arise, but feel free to make an attempt at solving that. I know of at least one good solution. My wife gave it to me almost instantly when I set this set of criteria in front of her. Alright, now quick start guide for learning this game. It's pretty straightforward. You have to choose your letters. So there's a letter deck. Players pull it out and they flip through and either choose intentionally or just randomly one set of 7 letters that they will both share during the game. Next, they're going to have to arrange these letters into a lexi-code region. So there's a whole deck full of starting grids that they can use as either examples or just to kind of take the decision heaviness away from the start of a new game. They'll take one of these grids and put the letters in the gray regions of the grid. They can rotate these for many different options and to make sure that there's no way their opponent automatically knows what their grid looks like. That's how they're going to start. I did put a note in here that players should not actually put their letters in their grid until they understand how gameplay works. So let's move straight to gameplay. There is room for additional setup for an advanced game using a larger grid. You'll note that once I show you my transparent overlays, they're set up to be versatile for a starting game or an advanced or expert level game as well. Gameplay. You have 4 things that you're going to be doing on a turn. Turns are taken completely simultaneously in lexi-code. Each player is going to either attempt to solve their opponent's lexi-code because they think they already have enough information from the previous rounds to be able to nail it, or they're going to choose a guess word and gain some information while giving up some information. Then they're going to commit and exchange guess words. The commit part is not a underestimated part of this. You need to make sure your word is valid. If your word is not valid, you can easily ruin the play experience. Now, players will exchange and grade, and then record results of what they know. That recording process is typically done with a logic grid. Logic grids provided with this game will have blanks in all the spaces, but there will be a link to an Excel sheet with macros or an online widget so that players can print out a sheet that has all the letters being used in their game already pre-populated, so all they have to do is put a little dot over it saying, oh, it's not that letter, it can't be here, and it's much quicker and simpler to keep track of their information, keeps the pace of the game going. Works perfectly fine with a blank grid, just having that option to print it before the game is very useful. Alright, so valid guess words, let me show you how those work. Players 1 and 2 here have some sample grids. The first rule is you must match your own letters when you're spelling in that region. So if player 1 were to align this guess and try to spell the word monster in here, he has an S where he has a T in his grid. He must match his own T if possible, so monster would not fit there. However, if he were to put it in his bottom row, that N would align and everything else would be in blank, so he can still use the word, just not in the spot he wanted. Next up is words that are too long. You'll notice that these transparencies have extra margins before and after every side so that players can spell longer words looking for partially correct answers. Narrative goes outside the margin that's provided, that's just way too long. Players are not going to be allowed to arbitrarily extend the margin of play indefinitely just looking for more letters that could be partial matches. And then next up is a rule that is, instead of a restriction, an actually allowed rule that needs clarification. Players do not need to spell a word that matches one of their own letters. They just need to match their own letters if the word goes through there. If player 1 were to spell the word steam here, well, there are just 3 blanks there where that EA and M are. That has not violated the rules and put a letter where he doesn't match. He can put anything he wants in those blanks. So steam would be a perfectly valid word there. It would be a valid word shifted down by 1, but he gets the option to spell however he'd like there. All right. So let me show you how grading works. Grading is very mastermind-like. Players will take their grid, spell their word. So player 1 is the guessing player for this clue, and he has an L and an S that are matched exactly in his own grid. He has 5 of the 7 letters in this 5-letter word, so it's a pretty good one to give. He shifts it over to his opponent, and then his opponent compares his own grid. There's an N here, and it's where a T is, so it is not completely correct. Well, is there an N in the word least? There is not. So he is going to grade this answer as 0 partially and 0 completely correct. This does not mean that player 1 has not received information. Player 1 can go to his logic grid and eliminate L, E, A, S, and T from all 5 of those spaces, leaving only M and N as possible variations there. Now you'll notice my logic grid's already filled out for the next step, because that was only player 1's guess. Player 1 did limit himself to only having L, E, A, S, or T in those spaces, so he's given up quite a bit of information himself in the process. But player 2 needs to make a guess at the same time. Player 2 spells the word laments, matching his A and his M here, and going through all of column 1. And you'll notice laments is a 7-letter word using all 7 of the letters in play, so he thought that was particularly clever. Coming over here to player 1, he overlaps an L, so it is not completely correct, and he has an L in the word laments up there, so there is 1 partially correct in this response. But now what did he actually learn from that information? Player 2 has learned that there is not an A, M, E, N, or T in any of these locations because they weren't completely correct. And now he knows there's only 1 letter in that first column. He knows there aren't 2. That's useful information, but it leaves him lacking a little bit of what he was thinking he'd get out of such a great clue using all 7 letters in 1 7-letter word. That's going to be the balanced lexi-code, is trying to make your vocabulary match your strategy and go back and forth until you can solve your opponent's grid. Now for replay value, I have considered including a module to this game, or potentially an expansion if the replay value is not needed. I'm leaning towards module at this moment, where players can take a deck of cards that have a round restriction, and players at the beginning of each round will flip one of these cards and see what their restriction for the round is. Restrictions could be you have to do a Christmas or Halloween themed word, you have to use a word related to pizza, you have to use a difficult letter in the word, or it has to go through a specific part of your lexicode, a certain grid location is marked. Maybe the word orientation will be backwards or diagonal, or diagonally backwards for that round of play, opening up both new interesting combinations of ways players can spell their words and interesting restrictions. Restrictions are a good thing for a game like this because you're attempting to self-impose your own strategy and then search your vocabulary for any words that match. If there are too many possible words that match and you have to eliminate all of them as possibilities, it can take a long time to get through all of that information. But when you have enough restrictions, there are only a few words you have to decide between, or maybe even 1 perfect word that fits your restrictions. You're not going to find yourself having 0 possible words because you are the one setting most of these restrictions. Just following your own letters are the only thing that are required, so you're not going to have difficulty spelling a legal word. Just getting the perfect word can be a little tougher. And then the last thing to note here are play variants. For any word-based game, you have to have some rules about what kind of words are allowed. By default, this game should be played in English, not allow proper nouns or compound words that require a hyphen. They should not allow words spelled backwards or diagonally, and you should not be able to repeat words that have been used during play already. If someone has used the word hair, you shouldn't be able to use hairy or hairdo to just give back the same guessing information in a future round. However, if you use a different word that's spelled very similarly, like chair, that's fair game. That's just using your own vocabulary in a better way. But you can't just stick a plural on something like you would in Scrabble and call that fair game for the round and a logical game that's important to eliminate. Now, players get to take every one of these variants and decide for themselves, do we want to obey the normal restrictions, or do we want to agree, hey, we're both multilingual, let's allow English and Spanish, or English and French, or Italian, whatever languages you know and you want to play with for both players, by all means agree to include another language. Or not even English at all. Maybe you're going to use this in a Spanish class as a teaching exercise, trying to come up with words that fit the grid, and they have to use their now limited version or vocabulary in Spanish to fit the requirements. That could be quite an interesting tool and experiment. Compound words, words spelled in different orientations. If you want to relax these restrictions, feel free. Just note that the more restrictions you remove, the longer turns will go on average. A typical game of lexi-code takes 20 to 30 minutes after setup is complete, and 8 to 12 words played by each player is a very standard amount of words needed to solve the entire 5x5 grid for all 7 letters. I haven't actually seen a single example go past 12 yet, but there is a possibility for words to go as many as 15 count before it's automatically solved for the other person's grid. That is lexi-code. I hope you like what you've heard. I hope you're interested in playing this game and making it so that my playtest copy is not going to be a unique thing in the world of gaming. Thank you very much. Again, my name was Joseph Summa.